Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I hope that you're having a great day today. Today is July 10th, 2025, and this is episode one of what I hope to be a continuing series called Talking Nerdy. This is where firewalls are hot and the takes are hotter, and no one is safe from my sarcasm. I am Matthew Parks, your voice of reason in your rogue script kiddie world. Let's decrypt the week. So specifically this week, there's some provision inside of the big beautiful bill that may affect Wi-Fi. So I want to make sure that we discuss it. Again, prefacing that this is not a political take. This is a technology take based on a provision in the bill that may affect technology that may affect all of us. So let's take a deep dive. So diving into the sneaky provision that's buried in what's called the big beautiful bill, despite name, it may not be so beautiful for those of us who rely on high-speed Wi-Fi at our homes or at work. And it could be a spectrum level disaster, a Thanos level disaster if everything goes as it is written in the bill. So breaking this down, Wi-Fi, which is omnipresent at this point. In my home alone, I have phones and tablets and computers and cars and televisions, ovens, locks, lights, cameras, doorbells, garage door opener, even the washer and dryer are all capable of accessing the Wi-Fi for various reasons. The smartwatch that you have on your wrist, the Apple phone or an Android phone that's in your pocket, that Windows computer or a Linux computer, if you're running something like a Chrome book or something, they all depend on Wi-Fi heavily to be able to access not only other devices around it for network purposes, but to connect to that big, beautiful network in the sky called the internet. So I want to first give a shout out to Jennifer Pattison Tohi. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but she works for TheVerge.com, and she was first one to flag this provision back in June 27th, which was 2 weeks ago, I believe, before the bill actually passed. So she pointed out that the Senate version of the bill proposed auctioning off parts of the 6 gigahertz spectrum, which is the lifeblood. That is the carrier frequency for Wi-Fi 6 and 7. So in the article, she quotes Ted Cruz, who is the chair of the Commerce Committee, and he says that the auction will prep carriers for the next wireless leap, if you will. Great language, sounds great, but one of the big three, AT&T, publicly stated that there's no pressing need for this spectrum at this time. So they were not on board, even though their lobby, the CTIA, were the ones pushing for this lobby. And in a bit of irony that we'll cover here, the 600 gigahertz frequency band of unlicensed frequencies was provisioned back in the first Trump administration by and the then FCC chairman, Ajit Pai. And at the time, he said that this would be a game changer for Wi-Fi, and it was. So I'll explain why that was as we go through a little bit of the history of how we got here. But let's talk about what happened in July. So initially, in the original bill proposed by the House actually voted to protect the 6 gigahertz band. But in July, specifically on July 3rd, they adopted the language that came from the reconciliation of the Senate's version, and it passed by a very narrow margin, meaning the entire bill. And it was signed into law by President Trump on July the 4th, which is Independence Day. It's all a big theatrical thing, but that's neither here nor there. But part of it is that now the FCC is required, because it's a law now that is signed by the president. Those of you who remember Schoolhouse Rock know how this works. The FCC is required to auction off 800 megahertz of spectrum across the unlicensed and licensed bands between 1.3 and 10 gigahertz. So if you do your math from grade school, you'll know that 6 is in between 1 and 10. So yes, that includes the 6 gigahertz band at this point. According to Ars Technica, the FCC could be forced to sell off, and could is a very doing a lot of work in that sentence, could be forced to sell off half of the currently unlicensed 6 gigahertz spectrum. So why that's important is that whenever most of the Wi-Fi devices that you utilize in your home, it utilizes an unlicensed band. So frequencies. So we'll get into that. So the Wi-Fi Alliance, they are the consortium that of Wi-Fi manufacturers and such. They actually sent a letter to the lawmakers, including Senator Ted Cruz, and they outlined that the 6 gigahertz band is the foundation of Wi-Fi's continued development, and they warned that the reallocation could harm consumers, businesses, and public institutions. So let's roll back a little bit and get a little bit of nerd nostalgia. So, first of all, let's define what we're talking about. So, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, was established to regulate the airwaves in the United States of America. And part of their role is that they assign spectrum, meaning different frequencies or different bands of frequencies for particular usage. So you have restricted bands, which are used by the military and by by government, whether that is federal, state, or municipal. And you also have your public service bands, which are for your first responders, police, fire, those type of things, so that they are only allocated for their usage. You have the FAA, aviation bands that are used for pilots to communicate with airports. So all of those communication pieces are allocated there. You have broadcast bands, which whenever you watch television and it is an over-the-air network, they are licensed by the FCC to carry their license, and they have to pay for that license because it is a licensed band that they're operating in. And so and it's happened here several times here in Jacksonville, Florida, where different networks have flipped frequencies. So at one time they were on one channel and now they're on a different channel because they lost the rights to operate on that frequency. So when you have that channel 4, that is actually a radio frequency, for example, that is allocated exclusively for that particular operator to be able to broadcast. When you're listening to the radio, those of you who still listen to the radio, that particular channel, if it's 600 AM or 92.7 FM, those are specific bands that were paid for by that operator to be able to broadcast on. So that's the license band. On the other side of the spectrum, we have what's called unlicensed band. Well, one other thing I want to make sure. Because the airwaves are public, you can buy receivers that allow you to receive information on the public bands, such as their police radio. So you can go to, I don't know if Best Buy sells them, but I know you can find them on Amazon and other places where you can buy a police band radio, and it allows you to listen to what's going on in police band. Reporters have them so that they know what's happening and how they can break stories. Other people, just out of curiosity, are able to do so as well. And but the difference is that you cannot broadcast on those frequencies. You cannot if you were to get on that frequency and you were to send out a broadcast or start talking on that frequency, you could be in violation of federal law by doing so, because you are an unlicensed operator on a licensed band. Another one is on the aviation side. Again, if a lot of drone pilots, they carry little aviation radios that they can hear what's going on at the local network or listen for air traffic so that they can have that extra layer of safety when they're flying around in the air, and but they cannot broadcast on that frequency unless they are a licensed person, or like a person with a pilot's license, a full pilot's license. They have a radio inside of the cockpit that allows them to communicate with the tower and with other aviators. But you, as a drone pilot, even if you are a Part 107 licensed individual, you do not have said right to do so. So that's license band. You have unlicensed frequencies, and so that's where part of being here in the U.S. is that we allocate certain frequencies for freedom of speech, Amendment 1. And in that band, you have like ham radio operators that communicate with each other. You have CB radios that, which I haven't seen in a long time. I just saw a show actually on HBO Max, what I do recommend. It's called Duster, and it brought back a lot of memories for an old guy like me about CB radios and such. But I digress. Citizens Band is what the CB stands for in CB radio, so it's in the name. And on those unlicensed frequencies, manufacturers started to utilize them to create wireless networks and wireless communication for your home. So the when wireless networking first kicked up, it was on the 900 megahertz band. And so that's the same band that the old cordless cell phones ran on, the old cordless home telephones ran on. So it was a very crowded spectrum. There was a lot of interference. The technology was relatively new in Wi-Fi. The standard was new, so it didn't have a lot of collision avoidance. So there was a lot of interference. So the next thing we did is that we looked at the next unlicensed band, and they moved up to the 2.4 gigahertz. Now in that 2.4 gigahertz band, it was more clean, more clear. But one caveat, and you'll hear me say this over and over as we continue this, is that as you go up in frequency, the smaller the actual amplitude of the wave means that you have less range and less penetration capability, meaning that you have a higher propensity for being blocked by walls, depending on the composition of the walls and such, and or other barriers, such as humans. And so as we get into the 2.4 gigahertz, it was great. It gave us higher speeds and it gave us more capabilities, but it also gave us a huge, huge interference problem. And that interference problem, albeit intermittent, was the microwave oven. So the microwave in your home, it broadcasts at 2.4 gigahertz of microwave frequency into the food that you eat. And so that frequency basically heats up, causes the molecules to vibrate in the water inside your food, which causes it to heat up. So that's how it works. And one of the problems is that most consumer communication devices, they operate in the milliwatt range, whereas a microwave operates in the watt range. And some microwaves inside your home operate in the kilowatt range if you have it at full power. Like I have one downstairs, it is 1200 watts, which is 1.2 kilowatts of power that are coming out of that microwave. So big bank, tank, little bank, that means that if you're running a microwave, you have a possibility of interfering with your network. Now, this is particularly prescient to me because I once spent 3 days at a client site years ago troubleshooting, and this is still in the early days of adoption of Wi-Fi, but I spent 3 days troubleshooting a Wi-Fi outage that was intermittent inside of a small company here in Jacksonville. And as it turned out, the culprit, and I use that term loosely, was an elderly administrative assistant who was heating up her tea several times a day in the microwave. The only way or reason that I found this out, because it was so intermittent I couldn't track it, is I happened to be sitting in the break room. And she came in and heated up her tea, and as soon as she did it, I looked at my laptop and it squashed that signal just like that. And I said, oh my God. So we had to do some rearranging, and we also had to give her some provisions about when she could heat up her tea, so that she didn't take out the entire office for periods of time. So true story. So the next time that you're in the break room nuking your lunch, you could be interfering with your business's ability to be productive. Just keep that in mind. So to get away from objects such as microwave, which were huge radiators, we went up into a cleaner, higher airspace, such as the 5 and 6 gigahertz range. Again, as mentioned, these became the standard unlicensed bands back in the first Trump administration. So between 2016 and 2020, I want to say it was closer to 2020 that Ajak got this passed on the FCC when he was chairman. And these benefits, this frequencies, I should say, gave us more performance, better performance. So we now have higher speeds. Some places you can get up to 2 gigs on your Wi-Fi network. We have beamforming, and that just means that because of MIMO. So MIMO is multiple input, multiple output. That means that your antenna, you have multiple antennas on your rig that will send out signals individually to devices. And it does so in a very tight beam directly to that device, which is beamforming, and it kind of follows and tracks the device as it moves around. But again, as I mentioned before, the higher up you go in frequency, the smaller the amplitude of the wave. So this means that the 6 gigahertz range has a shorter range, and it also has less penetration power when it comes to walls, weaker penetration altogether. So that means that we then started to utilize technology that came from the enterprise or corporate level, which was mesh networks. And most corporations and warehouses and such, you see that they have multiple access points. And the reason they do that is so that they can have a good saturation of Wi-Fi throughout their area. So given the shortcomings, it became a no-brainer for us to incorporate on the residential side the mesh network. So now if you go buy a router at the house, most times you're not buying a single one, you're buying a pack of 2 or more, depending on the size of your home, that will propagate a signal amongst each other and create a very large overlapping cell to give you good saturation of Wi-Fi to overcome that weaker penetration and shorter distance range limitations that you have with the 6 gigahertz frequency. So moving forward, why is this a big deal? Well, if you can imagine, just as we talked before, going all the way back to the 900 megahertz days with those cordless phones, as you dump more of this telecom frequency or telecom traffic back into the same pool as Wi-Fi, instead of keeping them separate like we have been, we're actually going to integrate them. You have a higher propensity for congestion and interference, and even speeds will suffer because you may have more collisions because of said interference and congestion. So this is counter to everything we've engineered over the last 20 years to overcome and innovate in this space. So that's why it's a problem. And that's why we could be seeing a serious impact moving forward in the next 5 to 10 years if this spectrum is actually sold to any of these carriers. It could be serious. So that's what I got for this. If you want to have a deeper read into what the bill says, I would recommend, again, the article on the verge.com, which is here, and the ZDNet article as well. Both of these have very good explainers as to what the legislation actually says, so that you can be better informed as to how it may affect your future. So if this made your brain tingle in any way, please smash that like button. Please drop a comment and just subscribe for any future dispatches of Talkin Nerdy. And hey, the next time your Wi-Fi drops midstream, maybe check your microwave to see if that leftover lasagna that you're trying to heat up to lava capacity or lava heat temperatures may have cause your router to reboot and eat itself. So that's a wrap for Talkin Nerdy, episode 1. I appreciate the time. If you like what you heard, patch in next time. Share it with a fellow geek, because 0 days wait for no one. Have a great day, y'all. Bye.